Hello everyone, my name is Ava, and in this section I'll be talking a little bit about the science of tulips, specifically how they relate to medicine, toxicity, or drug-like properties, and modern health research. As you can see on this slide, we have a couple of diagrams here, one of the tulip flower anatomy and one of the bulb. And I'll be referring back to those a little bit as I explain how people historically use tulips and how scientists study them today. All right. So historically, tulips weren't major medicinal plants, but people did use them in smaller, more traditional ways. Tulip petals were sometimes applied directly to the skin as poultices for irritation, redness, or sometimes mild inflammation. When you look at the tulip flower anatomy image right here, you can see how delicate the petals are, and that delicate structure was one of the reasons people believed tulip petals had calming or softening effects. These uses weren't necessarily widespread or intense, but they show early interactions between people and tulips long before scientific chemistry was available. So in the 1630s, tulip bulbs were traded kind of like investments instead of like plants. The bulbs often were sold before they were blooming, which created speculative futures contracts, which we talk a lot about later as well. The prices skyrocketed to kind of irrational heights due to the rarity and the excitement surrounding the tulips. But in 1637, confidence collapsed and the markets did crash. And this became one of history's earliest documented speculative bubbles. All right, now shifting over into some chemical properties. Tulip petals contain small amounts of flavonoids and phenolic compounds, which are antioxidant-related plant chemicals. But what's more significant is what's in the bulb. The bulb contains compounds called tuliposides, which can cause dermatitis, which basically means that certain people may get redness or irritation when handling the raw bulbs. It's like an allergy, kind of. So even though the tulips look gentle, the bulb actually has a mild toxicity that kind of shaped how gardeners interact with them. Recently, scientists have studied tulip extract, especially from purple tulips, kind of like I have in these cute little photos, and found some potential for anti-aging skin benefits, which is pretty cool. That includes supporting collagen production and helping epidermal repair. So this is still in really early research, but it's a modern scientific version of the same idea that people had historically, which is that tulips might have something beneficial to offer the skin. All right, so now that we've looked at tulips from a scientific and medicinal perspective, we can switch gears to their cultural and historical significance. If you look at the artwork that I have in a couple of slides, you can kind of see just how important tulips became in the societies that cultivated them. So right now we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, tulips symbolized refinement, purity, and elite taste, which appeared prominently in poetry, palace gardens, ceramics, textiles. There's lots of examples of this all across the internet and in a lot of museums as well. The 18th century tulip period, which ranged from around 1718 until 1730, marked a cultural moment where tulip cultivation and aesthetics were celebrated across the imperial court. And rare tulip varieties became known as luxury goods, and those signify status, elegance, and a person's connection to more elite artistic traditions. All right, so talking now about how tulips spread across Europe. After being cultivated in the Ottoman Empire, tulips were carried westward by traders, diplomats, and botanists. They arrived in Europe during around the 16th century and quickly gained popularity in many different places, Italy, France, and the Netherlands especially. And elite gardeners and botanists exchanged bulbs through formal and informal networks, helping tulips naturalize into European landscapes and artistic traditions. So tulips spread not just through trade, but through these networks of elite collectors, and the visual style of European tulip art kind of mirrors this cultural exchange, which you will see in this next slide. Here we go. Very pretty. So tulips in the Netherlands. Dutch collectors valued these rare colors, patterns, and shapes. And owning special varieties of tulips showed wealth, knowledge, and sophistication. And they played a major role in Dutch botanical art and garden design. And the economic demand did grow faster than the bulb supply did. On the right over here is a Dutch botanical illustration that shows streaked and flamed tulips, especially the rare patterns that collectors were obsessed with. These, quote, broken tulips, that's what they were called, became some of the most valuable plants in all of Europe. And the artistic style that you see in the image kind of reflects the way that tulips were cataloged, collected, and displayed. So now we have probably one of the most popular parts of history that people would know, which is Tulipomania, which is also the title of a novel that we read to inform this presentation. So basically, by the 1630s, tulip bulbs were traded as financial investments rather than as simple plants, kind of like we talked about earlier. Many bulbs were sold before they bloomed, creating these futures contracts that drove prices to extreme heights. Like we had said before, when the confidence in the market collapsed in early 1637, the prices plummeted, causing those speculative bubbles. If you don't know what a speculative bubble is, it's an economic phenomenon where the price of an asset, in this case being the tulip, increases rapidly due to speculation and optimism, not necessarily its intrinsic value. This occurs kind of as buyers purchase assets, expecting further price increases, amplifies like what's called irrational exuberance, and ends abruptly in the market crash. So a good example of this would kind of be like the U.S. housing bubble, but tulipomania is another one of the most popular examples of this phenomenon. So the tulip does in fact remain cultural icons in the Netherlands, and they retain their symbolic links to beauty, luxury, and elite taste. Ottoman and Dutch traditions did shape the modern identity of the tulip as a botanical and cultural symbol that still influences horticulture today. So before we wrap up this section, I do have a short video here, just a little clip of it to help summarize a bit how the economic side of tulip history worked and how, provide a quick explanation of how the bubble formed. But we're just going to play a little bit of this.
Wives. Sellers began to stockpile tulips, further increasing the price and, in turn, making the tulip appear as a sound investment. So rather than planting tulips, the largely inexperienced investors began to buy tulips with the intention of reselling, and this craze began to grip the nation. This corresponded with an outbreak of plague in the Netherlands. The plague, along with the casualties caused by the 30 Years' War, created a labour shortage and increase in wages. Plus, some say the fatalism which this produced made the Dutch more inclined to take risks. The sellers found a way to keep selling for the period of the year when the plant could not be uprooted. The new merchants would trade in contracts, and this was an early form of what is now future contracts. But these contracts were not regulated and largely conducted in taverns between the two parties. So bulbs and money rarely changed hands. Instead, the buyer would only have to pay a small wine tax, around 2.5% of the trade, and he could sell the contract on for a profit later that day. This skewed the balance between risk and reward. Therefore, throughout the winter months of 1636 and 37, the price of tulips had shot through the roof.
All right, so overall, tulips have a much deeper story than just being pretty spring flowers. They've had small but meaningful roles in traditional medicine, and they have fascinating chemical properties that most modern researchers are still exploring. Historically, at least, they did shape art, culture, and financial behavior across many continents. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed learning about the scientific and cultural sides of the tulip. And over here we do have some references.